But increasingly, one of the things we're beginning to see is that while we have a growing youth population in Nigeria and in different countries in Africa, there is a sad trend that one, despite the growing youth population, it does not correlate with the level of youth representation in government. So ordinarily, you would assume that if you have a high level of, or a high or an increasing growth in youth population, that you would also begin to see that representation in government or governance itself reflects that population. But one of the things we're beginning to see within the continent, not just in Nigeria, is that while we have a growing youth population, young people are still underrepresented in different areas of governance, especially in decision-making processes. I don't want to go into the bigger challenges around poverty and unemployment, because while we were discussing in Nigeria, talking about the growing youth unemployment, young people living within the poverty line, and talk about young businesses thriving, or rather young businesses struggling to survive within a system that is not enabling development. In Kenya, it was almost the same thing. So why did I want to start with Kenya? Because in Kenya, they have about 61% youth population. But when it came to the data on youth registration, barely 39.8% young people were registered to vote. And I was taken aback. I said, wow, at least Nigeria, you still have high youth registration in Nigeria. Because in 2019, we had 51.1% young people registered to vote, under 35-year-olds yet registered to vote. And INEC actually projects that we could have an increase in the number of youth voter registration in the next elections, because of how young people engage the just concluded continuous voter registration. But so just having some chat with some young people in Kenya, some of them, their concerns were just, first, they felt, well, the major candidates running for president, we don't see ourselves reflected in them. They don't really speak for young people. We don't feel connected to them. Some just felt that there were no opportunities for engagement. So why register to vote when we are not truly or sincerely represented in government? And then so for some others, they just had a major challenges that there was this research I was reading and talked about growing youth unemployment and lack of job opportunities for young people in Kenya, how small-scale businesses are also struggling to survive in Kenya, which is basically the sector that young people have been going into to try to earn less sustainable livelihood. So different countries, different sub-regions, East Africa, West Africa, but almost similar concerns. And that is our case in Nigeria also, that while you have a growing youth population in Nigeria too, that when you look at government or look at the face of government, if you look at how elections are run every year, that young people are the least represented in offices, in elective offices. And for us, that I would say is almost a tale as old as time, because that was the birth of the Not Too Young to Run movement. And if you hear the name, it's as simple as it comes. Not too young to run. The idea for us at the time when the conversation started was that every year when you go online, you always hear Nigeria, they always talk about youth population in Nigeria. But by the time we had done an assessment of youth representation in government, we have found that young people were not represented in government. So be it at the executive or the legislative level. So if you talk about National Assembly, so the Senate and the House of Representatives, if you look at the state assemblies, governorship, obviously, so far we've not had any young governor. Presidents, obviously, you all know who our presidents have been in the past years. And the first time the conversation started was in 2009. And it was a moment of, I think it was more like a moment of awakening. What happened in that year? So there was an ongoing conversation around amending the Constitution. And one of the things we had identified in the Constitution was the fact that there was an age limit with limiting young people to contest for office. Now, 2009, obviously, I was much younger. Now I'm an old person. So in 2009, I felt like, wow, so I'm not even old enough to contest for any of these offices, if at all I was to contest for office in that particular year. But I was engaging in my community. I was doing a lot of things within the communities where we were working at the time in Plateau State, Jos. and also working in different states in the country. And it just felt like it just felt like injustice. Why live in a country where your generation constitutes a majority of its population, but yet your generation is excluded from decision-making processes? And who are the major consumers of policies made, or major beneficiaries or victims of policy made? The majority of the population, who basically are young people. So if young people are not part of the conversation, how can we have laws and policies that addresses the needs or the challenges or the issues of young people? So it just began as a question. And at the time, we were still students, and the first conversation was, okay, there's an opportunity. Constitutional amendment was ongoing. We had tried at that time in 2009, made proposals for the age to be reduced in the Constitution. At the time, to contest for president, you needed to be 40 years. To contest for the Senate, the governorship, and the House, you needed to be, Senate and governorship, you needed to be 35 years. To contest for the House and the State Assembly, you needed to be 30 years. The State Assembly for us was even because the state should have more young people, because the State Assembly is closer to the people. That first attempt did not succeed. The bill did not make it through. The proposal was not adopted. In 2012, there was also an attempt to amend the Constitution. It also failed. Now, 2015, one of the things we had done was to find out, there was the point of, there was an assumption that young people wanted to run for office, but could not contest because the age was limiting their aspiration. So we had to conduct an assessment first to test this assumption. And by the time we did a candidacy analysis in 2015, we found out that there were young people who were below the ages as highlighted in the Constitution, who contested in that particular elections. So we had underage candidates who ran for office in 2015. And what that meant was that if any of them had won elections, the elections would be challenged in court. But what we got from that particular finding, one major finding was that, yes, we have young people who want to run for office. The second was that these young people, for those who wanted to contest for, especially for the State Assembly seat, a lot of them were below the age, which at the time we believed they were not even aware that there was a constitutional amendment limiting their contestation. So there was that, so it also affirmed that, yes, we do have younger people who wanted to contest for office, but who the Constitution, by virtue of the Constitution, would not be qualified to hold office if they win the elections. And then there were 2 or 3 cases where these individuals won the elections. However, their opponents challenged it in court, and their elections were overturned because they were below the age as at the date of the elections. No, the date that the candidates' nominations were submitted, because that's when it starts to count. So we also found the justification that indeed few, be it 1 or 2, had won, and now they had lost the seats because of their age. And we decided to push again, but this time to make it a movement. Now the idea because the conversion today is from a policy idea to law. While we had tried other previous years, 2009, 2012, to push for an amendment to the Constitution within the opportunities that existed within those 2 years. This time around, in 2015, before the election, before the analysis, there were several initiatives supporting youth participation in government. So be it initiatives to drive youth registration, initiatives to get young people to contest for it, lots of initiatives, right? But a lot of people did not even understand that for some of those young persons, the Constitution was a limitation to the aspiration. So having the conversation around getting younger people to run for office, we had several debates. And one of that was, but if someone is 35 years old, the person is still reasonably young. After all, the African Youth Charter defines the youth age as individuals who are 35 years and below. So that is still a young person. For the State Assembly, if you're 30 years old, you can still contest for office. If you're 30 years old, because 30 is still reasonably youth. But one of the things we started to realize was, if you have a lesser number of young people contesting for office, there's a likelihood that you have an even lesser number win elections. Unlike when you have more people contest for office, there's a likelihood that you could have an increase in the young people that would win elections. Why that argument? If you open up the space and create an opportunity for more people to contest, you make elections truly competitive and you give young people an equal fighting chance in the electoral process. So we may have 1,000 youth, for instance, contest. Not all 1,000 may win, but at least you could get 100 win elections. Unlike when the age is a limitation that only 500 could contest. Out of that 500, only 50 may win. And this 50 may most likely be between ages 30 and above. And if you do that categorization, it means that the interests or the needs and challenges of persons who are under 30 would not be represented. Bearing in mind that while we have a youth categorization that extends from 18 or 16 to 35, that within these age brackets, there are different generations. We have the millennials and the Gen Z. So there will be individuals who may be young people by the virtue of their age, but when it comes to their socialization and the way they operate and interact, they may be different because they operate within or they are within different generations. So the idea for Not Too Young to Run was open up the space. If young people constitute the higher percentage, then we must open up the space just so that we can have younger people contest in larger numbers. And when we do an assessment post-elections, we can say that while we had 1,000 contests, we had a larger number win, rather than we had a smaller number contest and an even fewer number winning elections. So that was what started the conversation. But this time around, we had to move from just an initiative or a policy to get people in. We already have, the National Youth Policy that talks about youth participation in government, but policies are just policies. They do not, they are not as, they do not have a mandatory force or compelling force like a law. And what we needed was to have a constitutional statement that opens up the space. So there were different stages for us. First, we needed an entry point. But because we had tried twice in previous years and failed, we needed to also change our strategy. So for us, we needed to first identify who our people were. Who are the major beneficiaries of this law, or the potentials, or those who would potentially benefit from a law if it is passed? Young people. So we needed to first get young people on board, which was what informed the setup of a strategy. And I think it's always important when we start thinking about how do we inform policies or how do we inform legislative reviews or reforms, we need to first of all think about the direct beneficiaries or those who seem to gain more when the law is passed, because that is where we begin to build our strength. So the idea was first, we need to get young people on board, set up a structure. And there was the idea to set up a national structure. So at the center, you have a strategy team, and then you go to the state level, you get the state coordinators, and every state coordinator sets up leadership teams that has individuals from different local government, different ethnic and religious group, political interests, and also gender diversity and even disability inclusion. Because we really wanted a movement that was not a male-driven movement for one, but also a movement that was not seen as one-sided or a regional movement. We needed a movement that was truly national in itself and driven by young people. So the setup of the structure started, and it's always important to think about your structure. Who do you need as drivers there? And in setting up a structure, we're also thinking about what does every individual bring on board, because you need to identify the resources within the individuals that would be part of that structure. Now, resources is not just money. For us, resources were the tangibles and intangibles. So think about who are those who are good with social media that could make hashtags trend? Who are those that can get issues become conversations on social media? Who are those who can mobilize? If it's time to go to the street, they can get people to the street. Who are those who have access to the media? Who knows someone that could get us a meeting with a lawmaker in the National State Assembly? Or even at the executive level, who are those that have access to potential donors, So resources for us was looking out for everything that we need to get the movement going. So structure was one. The other conversation was the entry point. So to change the constitution, you need to get the amendment in. And this time around, we wanted to go through private member bill. We identified young lawmakers in the House. In the House at the time, Honorable Tony Nwolu was the sponsor of the bill, and he sponsored the amendment to the Constitution as a private member bill. And in the Senate, we had Senator Nyako, who sponsored it as a private member bill also. But we tried different approaches, because when it comes to advocacy, when it comes to legal reform, it's always good to ensure you've covered different aspects. So the opportunity to negotiate, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, and you want to also create rooms of opportunities. So one of the things we had done was, for the bill in the House, we had proposed a reduction by 5 years for each. So for House of Reps and State Assembly, a reduction to 25. In fact, we had proposed for the President, the Senate, and the governors, we had proposed a reduction to 30 years. In the state Senate, the bill in the Senate proposed for removal of age. Because there was also the conversation within the movement that beyond just age, why not focus on other things as qualification? If you're old enough to vote at 18, you should be old enough to contest. Let's leave it open for the parties and the people to decide if you are eligible to represent them in government. So the bill in the Senate removed age totally and focused on other criteria to contest for office. We also had proposed an independent candidacy bill. So because we felt that with independent candidacy, you would have younger people contest for office, which I must say, Kenya actually has independent candidates running, those who do not want to be part of political parties. And we had felt there were examples in different countries to also adopt. So this was a proposal that we made. Now, I wanted to highlight this proposal because when it comes to moving from a policy idea to law, there are times you need to negotiate, and there are times you need to pick your quick wins, things you can live with, things you can live with, things you cannot live without. So we had these different proposals, and we knew that there would be a time we would need to harmonize and agree on what would be the final position. But getting the bills in, the bills were sponsored. It passed first reading in the House in 2016. Passed also first reading in the Senate also. Now, to amend the Constitution, you need 2/3 majority support in the House and in the Senate. You need 2/3 majority of members to vote in support of the bill. So vote yes for each bill. Then it comes to, after you get it 2/3 majority, it is harmonized, the bill is put together and sent to the state assemblies. Now, at the state level, you also need 2/3 of the state houses of assembly to vote in support of the bill. Now, if you get your 2/3 votes, it is then moved to this moved back to the National Assembly before being transmitted to the president for assent. So it's a long process, which is why constitutional amendment is always a long journey. Sometimes we don't achieve any amendments. So it was a long process, meaning the movement needed to kickstart everything. Now, part of what we started learning from the movement, was to learn from previous experiences. So like I mentioned, we have set up a structure, center, the state levels, and even local inclusion. We already had a name. The idea for Not Too Young to Run was we needed a name that young people could connect with, that necessarily do not talk about amending the Constitution, but focuses on the whole goal, that the fact you're young means that you can still contest for office, and no one is too young to contest for office. And I think the hashtag was one of the things that brought the popularity that the bill enjoyed. Now, and I would say this because I've gone to some states, I've met some young people who say not too young to run, but they had no idea it was an amendment to the Constitution. All they cared about was youth inclusion. And there's a benefit to that, because amending the Constitution is quite legalistic and sometimes very boring. If we take our time to start explaining, you need to amend sections, these subsections, that you lose the crowd, right? But if you focus on a message that is simple, that young people, that your audience or your internet beneficiaries can understand and easily connect with, there would always be rooms for the details and what have you with the elite and those who could those who have the powers to make the reforms. But for those who you need to lead the movement, they need to just understand the spirit behind the movement, the spirit behind the idea, and what it seeks to achieve. And for us, if young people could understand that Not Too Young to Run seeks to open up the space for younger people to contest for office, because young people ought to be in office, that for us was a success, because we don't need them to remember the sections or to remember the subsections of the Constitution. All we needed them to do was to connect with the idea and to run with that. And for us, that was key. So getting a simple and easy name that people could connect with, that young people could look at and feel or see themselves represented within the movement. Remember, the structure is always good. Who are those speaking? Who are those leading? Who are those driving the movement? And then the other part was around messaging or communication and messaging, which I believe is very important when it comes to legislative reforms or advocacy for laws, because we've also moved some of the ideas from not too young to run. We use that in the engagement for the electoral reform under the Fixed Elections NG, one of the movement that's working with so many other partners. At least we can say successfully also supported the process to amend the Electoral Act, and now we have a new law. So it was easy to, it was easy for young people to understand that, but we also needed to be committed to our messaging. And for us, messaging was about this ensuring a message that was audience specific. So the messaging to the lawmakers who were the power bearers at the time was different from the messaging to the young people who you want to lead the movement. So engaging the lawmakers, one of the things we had to do was first understand why the bills failed before. One of the reasons was a lot of lawmakers felt that the bill was a threat to their position in office. So if you get younger people in, they would kick them out of office, and it means they do not have a say in government anymore. And whether we like it or not, power would not yield itself willingly just because you seem nice or because you have a good idea. Power wants to retain itself, and you only need to show power to challenge power. That's basically it. And when we understood that these lawmakers felt a bit threatened by the bill, the conversation was, one, what is the idea of democracy? And our message was around the importance of inclusion in a democracy, the importance for intergenerational representation and dialogue. And when we engaged lawmakers, our focus was basically not too young to run. It's not about youth takeover. No, not too young to run is about opening up the space so that the younger people can come in to learn from the experiences of the older ones who have been in the system, just so that there is sustainability, that when you finally leave, there wouldn't be vacuum. So for us, what we were seeking to achieve when we engaged lawmakers was to create that sense that hello, I don't know if you can still
Hi,
hear
is
me.
is it just
Can
me?
you still hear
Yeah,
me?
yeah, we can hear you now. Sorry, I was just about to say
Yeah, so perhaps I will just turn off. I'm trying, yeah.
yeah, just you can
Power
just turn
was
it off now.
interrupted. I had to switch to another internet.
Okay, yeah, it's fine.
Yes, let's try this. Yeah. Hmm, look at that. Yeah, I think I was talking about the messaging, the communication. So for the power bearers, we had to understand who they were, just so that we would be able to provide the kinds of messaging that wouldn't close the door for our advocacy, but rather keep the doors open. And for every conversation that we had with them, the focus was on the importance of intergenerational conversation or representation in government. Now, engaging with younger people, one of the things, our conversation with them was simple. It's time for young people to be in government. It's time for you to take over. Now, young people like to hear you take over. So communication with younger people was a bit different. Now, communication within the media was broader, because for the media, we needed to provide as much details as we could, just so that they would not, that in communicating the ideas of the movement, they would adequately communicate the spirit behind the movement. So it was all encompassing. It was about the need for youth inclusion, the need for representation for democracy, the need for a constitution that was truly reflective of the population as at today. Because when the constitution was made, young people may not have been a majority of the population, but now young people are. So we need a constitution that truly includes the youth generation or the youth category. So the conversation with the media was a bit broad, but there was a lot of intentionality in building our narratives and in ensuring that for every conversation we had at the national and the state level, that we were all in sync. So we always had very simple talking piece, and we shared it with everyone. And people at the state level, because those at the state level were engaging also with their state assemblies, with their media, with stakeholders. And for every one of them engaging, while they had the basic ideas, they could build upon that narrative, suiting their local context, because we wanted to also ensure that we were not shooting ourselves in the foot while speaking at the state level. So we always told people, you understand your community better, you understand your state better, so ensure that your communication is reflective of what the realities are in your state. And so that was one of the others for the conversation. Communication and messaging was key for us. And I think for every engagement, for every advocacy, there's always that need to ensure that while you have a structure, while you you've identified your people and all that, your messaging and communication truly serves your purpose rather than defeats your aim. The other part for us was to amend the constitution. You needed the two-thirds majority support votes. So we needed to have meetings with almost every lawmaker that we could have access to, because that is the major work. It's not enough to have protests in the streets. Protests are good and protests serve their purpose. But when it also comes to law, there are times you need to move from protest to concrete action that targets the key stakeholders that do hold the powers to inform the kind, or to influence the kind of change you're advocating for. So if you think about, if you try to remember a bit about Not Too Young to Run movement, we had some protests. We had the major National Day of Action. We had another National Day of Action, and then we had state National Days of Action. But each of those street protests served a particular purpose. And I think I'll talk a bit about the need to properly structure and strategize around protests, because protests are very effective tools when deployed intentionally. And so there were times where all the focus was on getting meetings. Thankfully, we had the two lawmakers in the Senate and the House who were sponsors of the bills. So they were major entry points in helping us secure most of the meetings. But also as an organization, we had worked with different lawmakers within the strategy team at the national level. We also had people who had access to other lawmakers. So, which is why I talked about those within your structure, the resources they bring, because there are times all you need is a meeting. I need someone to help put that call across. So there were different times we had met with the Speaker of the House, met with the chairs of the Constitutional Review Committees in the Senate and the House at the time, met with some of the lawmakers that we believed had major influence in the National Assembly, because when you work with the National Assembly, there are some lawmakers that you need to work with because they can get the votes of some others. They can convince other people to be on board with your idea. So there were several advocacy visits and meetings. For each of those conversations, we always had our talking points, why we needed their support. So that level of stakeholders or power mapping was very important. Now, beyond the lawmakers who were the major power bearers, we also knew that we needed the influence of international partners. So we had to get them talking about the bill, not necessarily meeting them for resources to support the movement. Because remember, I talked about when we started, it was not about the money. We were not beginning this with a fund is available to do this. It's an idea, there's an opportunity, we need to engage. If the money comes to support it, fine, but we don't want money to be a limiting factor, which was why our focus on resources were the resources within the communities that we believed were our strength to push for that movement, not necessarily monies. And so it's easier when you want international partners to speak on an issue without necessarily asking for money, because most times the expectation is that you come for resources and then it all becomes transactional. And we wanted to ensure that the movement in achieving the amendments of the law was in every sense disassociated with anything transactional. We needed to see real transformational engagement. And so we also got them talking about it. Thankfully, the UN got wind about the movement. It was adopted at the United Nations. So it also gave it that global feel. And I mean, Not Young Trump became very popular. And a lot of people wanted to be associated with that. But it all began with identifying who we needed to get on board. Beyond just that, another stakeholder was the media. The media were our major partners because you need people to know about what is happening. Social media is good and powerful, but sometimes when you need people to come out to the streets to protest or need people to engage, you cannot rely on just social media organizing. You need to get offline. And how do you communicate to larger people offline? Is to get the conversations on traditional media, the televisions and the radio stations, very effective. So there was a lot of engagement with the media. For every member of the cost strategy team, when you go to, for those who had opportunity to speak on any media platform, even if it wasn't about not too young to run, there's always this intentionality to chip it in along the line, to just mention that there's a movement to increase youth participation in government. So we're using every means possible to get our message out there. So media is always very important in getting the information out. Another stakeholder we usually don't think about, well, the major beneficiaries. So getting young people to care about this. There were several debates that were had. One of the things we tried to achieve in the movement was not to shut the spaces for dissenting voices, because sometimes there's a temptation to shut the doors to those who don't support your movement or your ideas. Now, in a democracy, there is opportunity for dissenting views to pop up. Democracy is like a beautiful garden where every flower or plant has a freedom to grow and thrive, meaning that no flower is more beautiful than the other, meaning your ideas cannot be the best. And for us as a movement, we did not want a situation where every young person who did not agree with us, we went after the person or we shut them down. So there were debates that were held between the skeptics and the champions. On social media, there were young people who did not believe in the idea. We did not go after them to attack the ideas. Rather, we focused on learning from those dissenting voices. So what were their arguments against the bill? Now, for every argument against the bill, we had to do our research to build narratives to address those arguments, just so that we're building a more comprehensive argument in support of our builds, which is why it's always good to hear the other side, because by hearing from the other side, you're also better informed on how to engage, what to say and what not to say, and how to build your narrative to support your ideas. So we were very intentional in listening to the dissenting voices and making it open. The other for us was ensuring that in the engagement, we were looking beyond political lines. So for us, it was not about one party. We needed young people across party lines to care about it, because they were also going to be direct beneficiaries. If the bill was passed, the major beneficiaries would be those who are already in the political parties to contest for office. And so for us, there was a lot around getting young people from across parties to engage and to also talk with their leaders within the parties to support the bill. Now, the not to answer the long story, so I'm trying to summarize by highlighting the key, I would call it the key points of actions that supported the passage of the bill. So the power mapping, like I said, broad, the lawmakers, the power bearers, how do you get in understanding how the National Assembly works? At the state levels too, the state coordinators were engaging with their state lawmakers, the speakers, lawmakers at the state level. There were several meetings held. Now the media, the young people across party lines, young people who will be the major drivers, international partners. So the power mapping could be as broad as you can think about. The next parts for us were the different tactics we'd be using. So advocacy visits was one of that. There were times for protest, but we did not want to be seen as a group that was always protesting without engaging. So we were very careful in designing our protests. The first major national day of action was when the National Assembly had a retreat, the Constitution Review Committee, and we had gotten information that the bill was to be thrown out, meaning that the bill would not be returning back to the National Assembly for the vote. So how lawmaking works, I'll just do a brief. When it is passed in both Senate and the House, the committee meets and it is harmonized. The bills that finally make it would be transmitted back for third reading, and then they vote. Now, we had gotten wind that at the Constitution Review retreat, that the bill was to be thrown out. Now, that for us was very important because we needed the bill to be brought back into the National Assembly for voting to happen. that was when we organized our first protest. And we not just want to rely on social media to do protests, to lead the protest. So while we tweeted about it, put it on Facebook, on social media platforms, we started leveraging our radio partners, because radio is a very powerful tool, but also reaching out to student community. So reaching out to student communities to mobilize students to come and join the protest, and talking about the importance of the bill. So we had that major National Day of Action in Abuja to the National Assembly. We had some of our state coordinators coming from the states to join the conversation, and it was a whole day protest. And our major demand was simple: get the bill back, get Not Too Young to Run bill back, and the bill must be voted on. We finally got lawmakers who addressed us that the bill was not killed and it to be brought back, and they would vote. So that was one major protest that we had. The other protests were at the state levels. The state coordinators were to organize national days of action at the state levels to bring the attention of the state assemblies to a bill at the National Assembly. Now, we wanted to start organizing at the state level even before the bill gets there, because we needed, permit me to use a biblical analogy, we needed the John the Baptist to go to talk about the coming of the Savior. So for us, it was get this conversation started at the state level, so that when the bill finally gets to the state level, the lawmakers would already be aware and informed of it, and they would understand the importance of the bill. Now, why did we feel it was important to get young people at the state level to start to engage? Like I said, power respects power. Now, lawmakers, for them, what is important to them is winning elections and getting back. Now, if you can show that a major percentage of your constituents care about a bill, and that if you don't vote in favor of the bill, they can vote you out of office by voting your opponent, then you get them listening. So we did not want a movement that was seen as an Abuja movement, because those of us in Abuja had no political value to them. We don't vote in the constituencies. We don't, our voting will happen only in Abuja. Abuja has just one senator. So we think about that, we did not have the power that they would respect. That was why we needed the state actions to happen. And at the state level, we had some states having as much as 5,000 youth protest to the state assemblies and telling them a bill is coming, vote in support of the bill. If you don't vote in support of the bill, young people will not vote you into office. And I want to talk about the importance of movement, because I think the Not Too Young to Run also benefited from the importance of movement, that by the time we were getting to the period of voting, 2017, 2018, those were pre-election years. So when the messaging was around, if you don't vote in support, young people will not vote in the next election, it was a bit real to the lawmakers, because they were already planning for the next election. So that moment was quite instrumental in getting the kind of attention that we needed from the lawmakers. And I think that's also very important in the engagement. We need to understand when we leverage a moment to build a movement, and how we can achieve more results by understanding the timing within the political space. So the state actions were happening before the bills got there. Other things we were doing, letter writing. We asked people to write letters and we help them deliver to their lawmakers, text messaging, and think of all the others, and obviously social media and media. So we had the other protest we had was when the bill was finally passed and we needed the president to assent. So the other big protest was basically to get the president to assent to the bill. So if you think about it, we were not protesting consistently all through. We were because we did not want a situation where people would begin to just think it's just this youth thing, and it's always this youth thing. We wanted to show something different and deploy protests effectively, and then use other means of engagement. So tactics, your strategies, they are very important in every engagement. How you want to, depending on what the ideas are, what kind of policy reform you're looking for, or how you want to, or what kind of legal reform you're looking for. So these were some of, I'm looking at my time, some of, I would call it key points of action that enable the passage of the bill into law. But if I want to circle back to why this is an important conversation, because this evening we're talking about from policy idea to law, and what we achieved post the law was signed, what post the law was passed. Is the fact that it started with that question, why are young people a larger percentage of the population, but yet the least represented in government? Why don't we have younger people in government occupying elective offices? What can we do differently? It started as that. Now, there were opportunities for pushing for a national youth policy, which already existed, but we had understood that when it comes to a hierarchy of laws, constitution supersedes all. After constitution, you have the legislations before policies. So constitution would always be the ground norm. So which was why we decided to engage the constitution. But remember, I had mentioned we had two proposals. There was one, the Senate had removal of age, while the House had reduction of age. There was also the proposal for independent candidacy, which a lot of young people also connected with because they did not feel the existing political parties represented the ideas. But when it came to the engagement, because when it comes to lawmaking, there are times you need to negotiate and there are times you need to let certain things go. Independent candidacy did not make it in. And we understood that it was easy to push for an idea than to push for several ideas. Because when you push for one idea, you are a bit more consistent and you can follow through. When you push for several ideas, at some point you get a bit distracted and you get really exhausted because lawmaking, legislative advocacy is quite an exhausting process. So when independent candidacy did not make it in, we asked ourselves, can we live with that? Can we step this down? And subsequently, it can always be pushed forward. Yeah, so we did not make a lot of noise about that because we still had the age reduction bill. Now, the removal was not taken, rather the reduction was taken. However, not every office was, not all the offices that we had proposed for age reduction had the ages for contesting those offices reduced. So for instance, the president was reduced to 35, from 40 to 35. The Senate and the governorship were retained at 35. The House of Reps and the state assemblies were reduced to 25. Now, at the point, we believe the Senate and the governorship were reduced to 30. But somehow, when the bill got back to the National Assembly and the period between that and transmitting to the president, the age was moved back to 35. We're not even sure what happened. However, when it comes to why I wanted to bring this up is because sometimes there are times when we advocate for things, we need to also understand that we will not get all we had pushed for. We need that you may push for 100 ideas or different proposals that have different angles, but you may not get all of them, you may just get a part of it. But you live to fight another day, right? So for us, it was not a total loss. We got some offices, the ages for contest for some offices reduced. This House of Reps and the state assemblies were very important to us because our data had shown that we actually had more young people interested to contesting for those offices. And if you think about Nigeria's political landscape where elections are very expensive, it is also cheaper for younger people to run for state assemblies and the House than for president, Senate, or governorship. So there were benefits to reducing the president to 35 and reducing the House and state assemblies to 25. So that for us was still a big win. We did not achieve all we wanted, but we did not make a lot of noise about those things. We only said, okay, this is a major win now. We can always push for further reduction, or another generation could do that because every generation must choose its own fight, right? So we didn't achieve what we wanted, but we got a part of that. And were there success stories post the law was passed? Yes. In 2018, the president signed the bill into law, and we had a new framework for age eligibility for contesting elections in 2019. And what we had seen was we had a large percentage of young people contesting for that office. Not all of them won, but our initial assumption became a positive when our initial assumption of if we open up the space and we have more young people contesting, then you can have an increase in number of those who win. Unlike when you have a closed up space and you have a lesser number contesting, then the numbers will be even much smaller. And then 2015, we had barely 3 people under 35 years in the House of Reps. But by 2019 elections, that number increased to about 13 of them under 35, which for us was a success. Now, when we did our assessment, we had about 101 young persons who were 35 and below as at when they won the elections in 2019. And within that number, about 20 of them were under 30-year-olds, so persons between 25 and 30 who won their elections, which for us was landmark because we had not had 20-year-olds in the National Assembly, at least since 1999, and in the state assemblies rather since 1999. So we had a 26-year-old, we had people in their 20s who won the elections and who subsequently became principal members in their state assemblies. And post that elections, we had 4 35-year-olds who became speakers of their state assembly. So 4 persons who were under 35 years, who won the speakership positions in their states: Zamfara, Kwara, Plateau, and Oyo. Sadly, Plateau had an issue recently. I don't want to get into all of that, but for us, those were a major success. And that is why I'm going to start the conversation earlier was on open up the space for more people to contest. If you have more people contesting, there's a likelihood that there will be an increase in the number of young people. Now, did we achieve the kinds of percentages of representation that we wanted? No, because representation is still at 6.6% for young people, 35 and below, as at 2019. The idea is to push that number up. Subsequently, we hope to have at least 30% young people represented in office at the national and the state levels. Now, bear in mind that this does not include local government, because the local government's administration is a different administration. Its elections are different, and it is managed by a different elections management body and election law. So this for us were how will I put it? The major success, the fact that we had it amended. Not all we had proposed got amended, but some of them were. We had younger people who won elections, which for us was a huge success. But the bigger success for us was the awakening amongst young people that it was time for our generation to take a stand in developing and building our democracy. That for me and for a lot of us in the movement was a major win, that younger people started talking about government, started talking about politics. Young people felt that they actually had the right to contest. So it was not a matter of privilege. We were not going to beg or plead for government to get us involved. Not too young to was that bold statement saying we are not too young to run. We have a right to contest for office, and we have a right to be represented in office. All we need is that opportunity, or is that space to contest and let the voters determine if we are fit to represent them in office. And I think that is where we need to start engaging from that. For every engagement, it's always important to have it founded in rights, because when we have it founded in rights, the right to participation is a civil and political right guaranteed in all our international human rights instruments and regional instruments and human rights instruments, and even in our constitution. If the sovereignty of the people is the basis of which governmental powers are exercised, then it means that the people should be truly represented in government. And if young people make up a larger percentage of the people, then government should be a reflection of the people, including young people. So we can no longer dwell in a system where you have a large percentage of young people, but you do not have that representation in government. Same also is the argument for women representation, that when it comes to democracy and representation, we must seek to achieve different levels of diversity, because that is what promotes the whole idea of democracy. But I think I would round up in saying that for every engagement and every advocacy that we and every initiative that we all work on, we always need to understand that this is the fight we have to deal with at this time in our generation. We do what we can within our time, because subsequently some other generations will do that. But if we do not fulfill any purpose within the time that we have in this period that we are active and engaging, we're going to always look back and wonder what if. The last thing I want in my life is to wonder what if. So for everyone who is listening and who is part of this conversation. I want to first thank you for the audience. I'm sorry I've taken some minutes beyond my time. I know there'll be rooms for questions and comments if we still have time. But just to thank you for even taking that bold step to be part of, to take action in your respective communities, and for you to always believe that you've started doing the right thing by taking that first step, and that you're answering a question for your generation and building a system that can live and serve the people that will be coming after you. Once again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. What an insightful section. And I'm sure that we're leaving here all encouraged and, making up our mind and resolute to, put in our best to make sure things work and not ask questions of what if. With that said, I would now turn to participants for questions. If you have a question, please raise your hands or just type in the comment box and your questions will be taken. Bright, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ma, for such an insightful lecture, and I'm happy that I'm part of this session. Thank you so much, Ma. I have two questions actually, and then I want to go straight into that. While you were speaking, you touched one of it, but I still would want to ask the question so I get it very clearly. The question is, how did you handle dissenting opinions? And what strategies did you employ to get those people who had dissenting opinions? What are the strategies you employed to convince them to buy into what you were fighting for? And then secondly, how were you able to mobilize members of the public to stage up the protest you mentioned for the fight you were engaging in? How were you able to mobilize them? You mentioned about 5,000 persons in one of the states or thereabout. How were you able to mobilize them, that number of young people especially? Thank you, Ma.
Thank you, Bright. Do you have any other? Madam Cynthia, do you want to take it one after the other, or you want to take
I think it would be nice for time purpose to have all the questions and I can respond if we have any other question. Yeah.
Do we have any other question? Do you have any other question? If you have a question, please raise your hand. This is your opportunity to ask. Okay, I don't think we have any other question. You can go ahead, Ma. Oh, sorry. Evan.
There is. There's a hand.
From Evan.
Yeah, Evan.
Evan, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, madam. Good evening. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you.
Go ahead.
Go on.
Okay. Thank you for giving me the floor. It's an opportunity and a privilege to listen to you when you spoke about this topic, great topic, policy to law, right? We have, personally, my experience, I've listened to and watched live, proceedings from the upper chamber and the lower chamber several times. Okay, there was a particular one that intrigues me the most and perhaps bears the burden on me because as a youth and because of my consciousness about unemployment, it burdens on industrialization in Nigeria, where a certain Miss Oti from Kogi State with some of her, her partners and other stakeholders in the industry of steel. They try to champion some stuff, policies and whatever to investigate and know what the challenges are and how we could go about it. Now, what's my point and what the question I have for us this evening and for you, madam, is that there's a lot of policy, there's a lot of movement out there, but very few survive the bureaucracy, the responsiveness of the state actors from the power bearer, like the power bearers you use as the term you used, a lot of them, I don't know. Do you think the problem is that they are not quite interested in the progress of our nation, or should I rather say they are not interested in the betterment of our people, but they are just there for their pockets? Because generally speaking, this seems to be the perception we have, especially some of us who are the background when these things come to the fore. Because I'm a serial volunteer, I volunteer for several organizations, and I have quite a bit of experience to have come in contact with some of this, and I know what goes on a bit. So my point now is, what do you think is the challenge? Because we as young people, if you look at us, we have a lot going for us, and we don't like to be hindered. If you watch what happened, what transpired about the NSAS problem, NSAS movement, you will see that our generation, we don't like to be hindered at all. So when we see such things, there's tendency that we might want to go another way. Okay, so we don't want movements to die. We don't want a situation where we just keep having multiple movements and there's no results. That's my point of asking the question. What really is the challenge? If we are able to identify the challenge, like when you were discussing, you were able to say something like, okay, some of them, they want to, you use a strategy in your own course. The strategy was that you make them realize that, look, if you don't buy into this, so percentage of the population are likely to vote you out, and they feel threatened. But do we have to always use the manipulative tendencies that we have to get these guys to do what we want them to do, or what actually is their responsibility to do? Okay, so that's the point. Let me not lengthen the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a fully packed question, but I can feel the passion in your voice, and I get where you're coming from. Thank you. I can see
Oluwatosin. One last question from Oluwatosin, and then we'll close it.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you so much for your presentation. I enjoyed it. Let me just go straight to my question or observation so I can add my question to it. And it's with regards to what the earlier person spoke about. I'm talking about NSAS. There was a point you mentioned regards that when you realized that you had a couple of agendas you really wanted to address and the legislators needed to come to terms with, but at some point in time, you realized that you were able to achieve one to a very large extent, which was with regards to age. And you emphasized it, you made some points, you emphasized the fact that you needed to come to a compromise. You needed to see the need for your organization to pursue one goal consistently compared to pursuing a couple of goals and get it to a particular point and you get exhausted. And I could see that with regards to NSAS. When NSAS started, it was really something of good hype. We all wanted just the way Not Too Young to Run was. It had a clear statement, not too young to run. And we had NSAS, very clear. It was very obvious. And after some weeks, I think, was it weeks or days, we realized that the government, everybody saw to it and they kind of banned SAS at that point in time. When I heard the announcement, I was happy. But when I realized that the youth were still out there, then the clamor has at that point in time changed. It was no longer NSAS. It was now probably we don't want worry or we want end to the government and so on and so forth. I would like to, I just wanted you to emphasize on the fact, I wanted to see if you can emphasize or explain further on the fact that there are some points that we get to, and I think that's the fear of the elder statesmen. The fact that youths can get carried away. And I'm quite impressed that this is the first time I've followed YIAGA for a long time, but this is the first time I'm actually listening to somebody within YIAGA, and I'm very interested about the story. I got to know about a couple of things. The fact that you had a lot of agenda, but you were able to see one through, and we are even seeing the outcome up until now. I look at it that if NSAS had actually stopped at the fact that NSAS pushed it further to make it law, pushed it further to the extent that they are able to implement, if you're a policeman and all of those things, you have to, implementing all of those policies beyond just NSAS, just the way you went further with regards to young persons being there. I feel that won't even be experienced. We still have policemen on the road. We still have, so it just waters down the effort of NSAS. So don't let me talk so much. I just wanted you to emphasize more on the need, or speak more with regard to your organization, how you were able to realize that there are some points you have to make compromises. There are some points you have to stop. For me, that was it during NSAS. It was so touchy for me, very emotional for me, because immediately I saw the TV presentation that they banned it, I really felt people ought to have stopped and all of that. And we saw how we went down. I don't want to go that side, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say. So I don't know if you get my point. And as I said earlier, thank you so much. It was really nice being in your session. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oluwatosin. And thank you for the questions asked so far. All these questions are very powerful questions. I hope I can sufficiently provide the responses that you need. So perhaps I would start from the first question on how do you handle dissenting opinions, strategies to convince them. So part of the things we learn in our engagements, or we learn in our work as an organization, and I'll make these two very important points. That first, Not So Young to Run was not about YIAGA Africa. That while we have been part of those who played the leading role, it was beyond YIAGA Africa. That is why it was a movement, and we had a strategic team at the center that had people from different other organizations, leaders from different other spaces who were part of that leadership team at the national level. And then we had the state structure. So a lot of people within the movement, they don't even work in YIAGA Africa. We all just became friends, because that's what happens when you work in a movement together, you build a family. So that's one point. The other point I wanted to make was responding to the question around organizing. Now, if you had remembered, I had mentioned that the first time we pushed for age reduction was in 2009. It failed. Now in 2009, we went as YIAGA Africa. We just went as one single organization. At the time, we were students in the university, came in from school, from University of Jos, came to Abuja, made the proposal during the presentation of memoranda, made our proposal. It did not go far. The second time we tried that was in 2012. There was an amendment. There was a constitutional amendment process ongoing. So we set up this cohort of young people working on constitutional and electoral reform. At the time, it was called YACOR, a Youth Alliance on Constitutional and Electoral Reform. And basically, it was led by organizations. So it was about organization membership at different levels. But one of the things that we had started with that was, it started with, first, there was availability of resources. So it was almost like, how do I put it? There was a lot of focus on do we have the funding to do this, rather than what's our strategy to get this done. And that's why I talked about sometimes when you focus on the money, we lose the system and the protest. If you remember NSAS, one of the things people celebrate about us, it was not a donor-funded movement. It was organic. The money started coming subsequently, but it started organically. And I think when a movement begins organically, I believe that it is easier to sustain the idea or the dream. And that for us was what we learned from 2012 engagement, because when the funding is no longer there, then it's going to be difficult for people to continue, because now people were used to getting funds to attend a meeting or to be part of this, and now they come for meeting, there's no money, they begin to question. So we were learning from everything. And now what else did we learn? Part of the engagement was we needed to learn about building a better structure, learn about how to deal with dissenting voices and how to deal with supporters and those who would oppose it. So we learned from those experiences. But before we finally engaged on Not Too Young to Run, we also decided to deploy an organizing model. So there's this special training on organizing, community organizing, and YIAGA Africa actually runs a community organizing institute on how to effectively organize. So a lot of the things we deployed in the movement were lessons from this beautiful community organizing model. It's actually designed at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and some of us in the team had participated in that training. Were part of the training for a long while, and we learned and got certificates from that training, which was what helped us to build. And part of what it will teach you, because that's organizing learns from experiences across the world, both the civil rights movement, apartheid movement, and think about every other movement that has succeeded in the past. Part of what we had learned, and that brings me to the part on the dissenting question on how to convince people, is that in every organizing, right, you're going to have your competitors, you're going to have those who would never be on the same page with the opposition. Now, it is not our duty as organizers to go after every opposition to get them to be on board with us. What is important in every work that you do is because the thing is, there would always be dissenting voices. So what is important is listening to your dissenting voices. Listen to those who do not agree, because when we listen to them, it is easier for us to build our own message. Because when I understand that his fear, so one of the dissenting voices were, and one of the major opposition was, Not Too Young to Run is about children of the elite. You want to amend the constitution so that only children of the rich will contest and win elections. That was one major conversation. The other was, it's not about age, it's about money. If people don't have money, how would they run for office? And some of these narratives were driven by young people. The other was, it is totally driven by those at the national level, sponsored by one politician to upset government. So there were different dissenting voices, even louder within the youth community. So you would think every young person would care about it because it's about youth inclusion, but no, not every young person did. And they would tweet about it freely, talk about it on TV. Sometimes they go and they argue with you on television and radio stations. So what I want us to take away from here is that in engaging, you can't change everyone's opinion. You need to focus on those you need their support. So there are people that at first dissent, but you need their support, so you need to get them. So what role do they play? So for instance, if the Speaker of the House was a major person, let's say the Speaker of the House did not agree with the bill, we know the role the Speaker would play in that amendment process. So I will look for new ways to get the Speaker to be on board. Not necessarily talking to the Speaker directly, I'll look for others, individuals or persons who have access to the Speaker to get the Speaker to listen and be on board. So now it's important I get the Speaker on board. Now, it's different from a young person on Twitter who does not agree with me. We need youth voices, but we don't need all youth voices. We just need a critical mass. Sometimes critical mass could be 10, and it could be as powerful as you can imagine. So for us, it was about identifying where we needed to put or invest our strength or our energies in. And we knew when the dissent was just a learning opportunity rather than a moment for conversion. It's not everyone you need to get on board. So one of the things we did, basically, we clearly did, our power mapping was beyond just the stakeholders, it was also amongst the dissenting voices. So your power mapping also includes those who are saying no, who are opposing. And with why you need to do that within that category is to understand which of the dissenting voices are important to your movement. So you know, okay, for this category, I need A and B to agree with me, but I can keep C and D aside. So I focus on A and B rather than focus on A, B, C, and D. That way it's easier to achieve success. I don't know if I'm responding. So basically, that was all we did. We focused on those that we think or we believed had influence, that were dissenting, and we tried to get them on board to agree with us, because those were the people we believed could change things. The other part was the strategy of convincing them. We only focused on convincing those we felt would impact on the movement. And part of what we had done was, there were times it was not about direct engagement or movement. We had to go through people. The other time it was about conversation. I remember one of the meetings we had with the chair of the Constitutional Review Committee at the time, Senator Ekweremadu, then he was the Deputy Senate President. And before the meeting started, we had done a lot of research. We knew a lot of things about him already. And in the meeting, I started the presentation and some others. I started with calling his traditional title. Thankfully, I'm Igbo, so I could relate to traditional title, calling traditional title, and building our message around those titles that I've seen him promote in other places, picking up messages from previous statements he had made before. And for several other meetings that we had, there were meetings that we did not go to directly. We just had individuals who were friends to us. When I say us now, remember it was a movement beyond national, sometimes at state level, individuals who could speak to them. And they were the ones who were our spokespeople for those engagements. So we were not engaging directly. So when it comes to convincing dissenting voices, for me, what is important is asking yourself, do I need these people to achieve this purpose? If I do, then I engage. So properly disaggregating within the dissenting voices, those that have potential to influence your movement, and then those that all you need to do is to see their dissent as a learning opportunity. So times where they say, I do not agree on that, when people talked about, oh, movement was for elites, children of the rich to contest and win elections, we had to go build a narrative to showcase that Not Too Young to Run was not about children of the rich. It was about young people that could contest for office. And it was about youth inclusion with or without, beyond social status or social class. So it gave us opportunities to build our narrative around that issue. So when it talked about, oh, most of us who were pushing for the movement wanted to run for office, thankfully, I had no plans to run for office. Most of us were not even interested in running for office. We also knew how to build a narrative and project young people in political parties who cared about it because they wanted to be in office. So it's always easy to disaggregate within that dissenting community, find out those who could influence your engagement, and then focus on getting them. But the strategy on convincing them must be diverse. You can't use one source of entry points. You need to understand what they care about, do your research about who they are, what they care about, who they listen to, and how they can, and how you can how you can have better access to them. How do we mobilize the numbers? The public talked about this protest. Now, every state coordinator went through a community organizing training. It was almost a week-long training when we learned community organizing. So the model from that Harvard Kennedy School of Government, the course there's leadership, organizing, and action. We reviewed a bit and adapted to our context, and we used that. So there was a training for all state coordinators, and the coordinators had the role of going back to organize. Carefully using the word organize, not mobilize. Because for policy advocacy and the kinds of change we want to achieve in a very toxic system or hostile system, is beyond mobilizing. Mobilizing is getting people out to come and go. Organizing is intentional, it's painstaking, but it is more sustainable, because when we organize people, they connect around the issues, they connect with the values, and they run with it, they take leadership with or without money. So for us, we needed to organize, not just mobilize people. So that was why the state coordinators, it was about people who wanted to be part of the movement. So people applied to be part of it. They indicated interest and they came for the training, and then they went back to the states, and every coordinator was to build a leadership team, and mentioned that made up of different people, a diverse leadership team, looking specifically at the resources. What do everyone bring to the table? Now, to mobilize people to the streets, every community has people that are major mobilizers. And the work that I've done, I know states, when I go to states, people I'm looking for that can mobilize. You see all these young people that they have young people within the school communities, they usually have very good strength to mobilize, especially if they are part of the student union movement at any level. Out of school youth. So we did not want a movement that was discriminatory, basically. And for us, it was the idea of getting people that had strength at the state level who brought things to the table beyond money. So they had the will to get people to the streets. Now, every state had the same amount of money. Every state was giving 30,000 naira to organize a state, because just in case you think it's big money, because like I said, there was no major donor fund to the movement. It was subsequent when the bill passed that we had funding to celebrate, to do convergence and all of these other things that came after. But the major movement, there was no major funding for that. At the point where we got funding, we had one to train the state coordinators. So we had the resources to bring people to Abuja for that community organizing training. Then we had money to support state days of action. And when we broke down the money, it was 30,000 per state. Each state coordinator received the same amount of money. And then they were to use it to get the show running. Now, what we need to understand is every movement, you may put in the same effort, but you may not see the same results. Because while some states got 5,000 people to the streets, some could only mobilize 100 or 50 people because contexts vary in different states. And the strategies, I will not be able to tell the stories of the guys at the state level that mobilized that number. I can only talk about the Abuja because we were there. But before protests, we had series of meetings, and in the meeting, everyone commits to the number of persons they would bring. There is critical commitment. I will bring 10 people. I will bring 20. I will bring 50 within that room. You commit, and then you also commit that within this 50, you can ask each of them to bring one person each. So there is that initial mapping. Then there was the other part around where else can we get the numbers? I always talk about students' community. We had tertiary institutions in Abuja. Can we reach out to the student union leadership within those states and within these institutions to get us students to come out? So there was also people who had to go to the schools to talk to people and get them to come out. Then the communities, there are communities in Abuja. And so I'm talking about only the Abuja one because I was part of that. I can't speak for the states movement because they all deploy different strategies. So those were the kinds of tactics we use. And then the usual social media, put out tweets, videos, talk on radio and all of that. But we wanted to do direct mobilizing so that we could get those numbers to the streets. But the people that could mobilize those numbers were those who were already part of the movement, who had gone through an organizing training. I hope I responded to that question. A lot of movement, very survival and dealing with difficult leadership. First, let me also put out that the states in itself, the states, when I say state now, government, the states is tyrannical in nature. It's not existing to be, the state is not there to give you everything you want. Because if the state was truly there to give you everything you wanted, then there will be no need for accountability or demand for accountability. There is a reason why constitutions guarantee freedoms for fundamental rights. It's not because we don't know that fundamental human rights are inherent in nature and that anyone in government should understand that these are basic things. These are the right to life is basic. Everyone has the right to life. But because we already know that individuals who occupy offices of power or seats of power will be selfish by nature and would want to benefit themselves only and breach every right. Why am I giving this preamble? That the reason we have advocacies is because in every country in the world, only the people get the government to work. When you see government performing efficiently, check that society. The people are very conscious and very active. Think about all the parts when you talk about the developed world. Think about it. Those are people who can't tolerate, you interrupt power 1 hour, they're acting like you've killed them. They are not comfortable with power interruption for 1 hour. Why is power shutting down, So it's the people that get the government to work. Meaning that in our engagement, we need to also understand that the fact we have elected lawmakers, we've elected a governor or a president, does not mean that they are there because they love us so much and they want to do good to us. No. The idea of government is that it's an interrelation or interconnection with individuals who occupy power, individuals who give them power. So those in government and those of us who have given them power to represent us. But the moment we sleep on our right and responsibilities, when we lose the opportunities to get them to work. So for every advocacy, my brother, let's just understand it. All the beautiful proposals and policy ideas, you still need to push for it. Because every lawmaker in government is first thinking of his personal interests first, how to stay back in government, how to retain his or her office, and how to meet the needs of those who also supported him or her to get into office before the broader societal problems. Meaning you need to ensure we put the pressure to give them, to pull their attention to those issues that also matter to us. And that is why we need to constantly engage. When systems begin to fail, it is because the people have stopped engaging. And we can only get our system to work when we do not let our leaders sleep on their duties. So we must constantly engage and push and advocate and threaten where we need to threaten. And when we don't need to threaten, when we need to be friendly, we are friendly. So when we engage, also it's a carrot and stick approach. There are times you commend for what you have done. There are times you hit hard for what they have failed to do. But you can't hit hard always. Once in a while, say you tried in this one, but every other time you failed in this one, you know? So we need to constantly see that. So trust me, each time you have a movement, there's an intentionality to one, disrupt your movement, which is why there will always be the spies or those who will be planted into the movement to disrupt it from internally so that it does not, so that its strength is whittled down. But it's about our commitment to that vision that has brought us to where we are, that keeps us going. Because if we're not committed to that, we'll be distracted, we'll be frustrated, we'll be exhausted, and we'll just sit back and let them do nothing. And for me, that is when we begin to fail, when we stop doing nothing. So please, I get your frustration. I think it was Ivan that asked that question. I get it. Remember I talked about not too young to run. It's a long journey. The first time it was pushed was 2009. The bill was finally signed into law 2018. So if you can imagine how many years, even if it's just me, that I spent on that journey, that was a long time. There were times I felt, okay, let's let this thing go. Young people subsequently would be in government. But I think there was just that conviction at a point that, you know what, it's now or never. Let's do this and let's see it done, at least within the period that we still exist within this youth age. And if we don't achieve it, it will not be that because we have not tried, but that we tried severally and we learned from each experience. The part around NSAS, Oluwatosin, very important question. And I guess a lot of us that, I think a lot of young people were part of the NSAS movement. We connected to it because it was organic. There was no one or two persons that you say, oh, it was about our generation demanding an end to police brutality. But there are lessons from every engagement, and every movement has its own structure and its own spirit. So I cannot compare and contrast between Not Young to and NSAS, because Not Young was has its own different system. NSAS was totally different, right? But one of the things I'm beginning to learn with every engagement that I've been part of, and even if it's just from the Not Too Young to Run, is when that change takes time, right? And because change takes time, it could be frustrating along the line that there are times we move and we don't achieve what we want to achieve, but we don't need to stop. We just need to take a step back, review our strategy, and engage again at a different time. So for the NSAS movement, one major success for me was the fact that young people beyond religious, tribal, political lines connected, came out on the streets for the number of days to make a demand with one voice. See, that scared the state. It shook government. Because this is a country where unity in diversity is a major challenge. And for the first time, a generation was showing unity in diversity. So that was a major win for me. In fact, if you tell me any other time, if there's something else I achieved, is there was unity in diversity. That young people spoke consistently with no donor, no major international, just young people, average individuals, everyday human beings, who were making a demand. That's one. Now, there are different layers to success, right? There was a pronouncement that has was, should there have been a time where we had to retreat and go back and re-strategize to identify the next line of action to make the demand? I think that is what is happening now. And I'm hoping that in different quarters, a lot of people are re-strategizing, which is why when I saw a surge in voter registration during the CVR, I was, in my mind, I'm like, that is the spirit of NSAS, getting young people to register. And I just hope we sustain that to actually vote, because voter so what so if we get younger people to vote in the next election, I can say there was I think that was where I
Just me, she's breaking up.
felt we needed to probably communicate like that. There will be several lines to pop up, and we'll begin to wonder which. Sorry, can you?
Yeah, it was breaking up, but we can hear you now. I think we've lost her.
Network just dropped off.
Yeah.
Let's just give her a few minutes. And
okay.
Sorry, I didn't even know I was off.
Yeah, sorry, network was bad.
Yeah, I'm just trying to summarize. So on the message, I get that first, because at some point it seemed like there were now several messages coming in at different points, and it seemed like the movement was taking on different fights. And if we want to learn from the Black Lives Matter movement, I usually like to make an example with that for different parts, if I want to trace it, let's trace it back to the boycotts in Montgomery when the Rosa Parks incident happened and the people decided to fight against racial segregation in the buses or the transport system. Their message was clear. If you note the protests, the bus boycott that led to a review of the law against racial segregation was simple. Rosa Parks was the one that ignited it. And then the people chose a means of protest, which is boycott all buses. They would lose the monies. We would trek, we would walk. It may take us longer to get to the office, but we'll do it consistently for as long as it takes until the law is reviewed. And it wasn't like there were no other challenges young Black people were dealing with at the time. But it is easier to pick one and focus on it, because you fight to win, to fight another day. So you see, if you think about all of that, the journey so far within the civil rights movement in the US, it has taken at different ages or different times, different generations have fought different fights. And the current generation now fighting for Black Lives Matter, the major thing they're fighting against is a criminal justice system that is killing Black people. So it's not like there's no unequal pay in the economic or the private or business sector. They still have all of those discrimination or discriminatory tendencies existing where in different spaces. But when the Black Lives Matter became a major thing again, the main message of Black Lives Matter was stop killing Black people. The police should stop killing Black, and they continued that. But while they were protesting, there was an election along the line, which was what changed the game in Donald Trump and Biden's election, that while they were protesting, they tried to organize to vote. Because at the end, it's not just about protest. You need to get people into office that can support your claim. So you need to still come out to vote. And if I want to relate that, that is where I felt if the focus at the time was NSAS, consistency in the message is what is important in every movement. And by the time different other messages started coming in, we started losing traction across the region, because in a politically diverse system like Nigeria, there is value in ensuring that our messaging is inclusive, in the sense that every individual that sees or feels or connects with that message would not feel attacked by the message. But when we start introducing different ideas that could potentially divide us, it makes it difficult for us to sustain action, and then it makes it easier for the state to break us down. And that was what started to happen, because before we knew it, within some states in the north, it was now secure our lives. That was the protest happening at the time. And that is because their current reality is different from the reality within the South, because they are dealing with banditry, with terrorism, with so many other things. And it's, by the time we started having different messaging across different boards, it was easier for the state. And like I said, the state is not out there as your bestie, waiting to grant every wish you have asked, or it's not Santa Claus or Father Christmas waiting to grant every wish you have because you asked. The state sees every action against it as a threat to its existence in power, which was why they introduced violence and deployed all the other strategies to keep people out of the streets. But it was easier because we started losing traction because of how several messages started to come in, and then it was easier for them to penetrate. So that may be my conversation around that. But one of the things I learned from that experience, because like I said, the NSAS was a success to me. I do not believe in any organizing movement. As an organization, we do not believe that there's anything as failure. For every movement and organizing, nothing is a failure. Every opportunity for us, what people call failure is an opportunity to learn, because if you don't experience it, you would not learn better on how to engage for the future. But when you experience it, you understand how to engage better. And NSAS was a major experience for a lot of young people. A lot of people are now leading several initiatives just because they participated in the NSAS movement. I've seen young youth initiatives across board in different states, even on social media. Some Twitter spaces are just on politics. We didn't have that level of engagement and consciousness until the NSAS movement. So I believe the NSAS did achieve a lot of things. Were there times we would have re-strategized better? Yes. However, it was a movement that was organic, and it was learning as it grew. And every process was a learning process. So it was like trial and error, trial and error. And I think for me, the message or the final message on this is, I said within that change takes time. Meaning that even within organizing in itself takes time. And leading to influence change would take even a longer time. So we must always see every opportunity as an opportunity to learn, and be willing to learn, be open to learn, be open to listen, because by that we can better strategize. There is a narrative that young people are not organized, young people are not coordinated. There's a lot of stereotype associated with the youth age, meaning that for every engagement we do, while we don't need to focus on the stereotype, we always need to show otherwise. That while this is a stereotype, this is how we can be different. Remember, we are only young people for a period of time. After a while, we transit, we become the adults. They will be the younger ones. I mean, sometimes I can't relate with 21-year-olds because I'm like, what's happening, because I'm now in my 30s. So when I'm in my 40s and 50s too, I would think differently. But the period that we exist within this age category, we need to learn to be better and to engage better, to listen more, to be more open-minded, and that as long as we're trying, we're winning. It's when we stop to try that we stop to win. So we keep trying, we keep learning from every opportunity, and we will do better. I believe that if there's going to be another wave for NSAS, the next wave for NSAS for me is the 2023 polls. The elections is the next phase for NSAS for me, because that is where young people need to show our political strength. We need to transform our numerical strength into the political power to change the outcome of the election. That's the next phase for NSAS. But that if we ever again go out to the street to protest, that we'll be doing that from a point of wisdom, and learning, because we have experienced a street protest that lasted for too long, and we lost people to that movement. So the next time we'll be going out of the streets, I believe it would be from a point of wisdom and better learning. So it will be more effective and efficient. But beyond that, there are several protests in different parts of the world. Nigeria is not the only country facing challenges. So even when we work within Nigeria, we should also learn from movements across the world, from the movement that succeeded in the past, and from the different opportunities that exist within the space that we operate in. I don't know if I responded to the questions, but I'm looking at my time. I'm hoping I responded closely, even if not adequately, but something I gave you some responses that could help inform whatever knowledge you'd want to learn around this. But once again, thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Madam Cynthia, for an amazing session. It did not even look like time had gone because it was so engaging. Thank you so much for taking our time to spend with us this evening. I'll hand over to Ebenezer now to officially. Thank you, and then we'll close.
Yes, thanks. Thank you so much again, Cynthia. This was really, really insightful. I learned a whole lot, and I'm sure that everyone here has learned a whole lot. For them who will be, generating policy ideas, they had seen the process that the Not Too Young to Run movement went through, and I'm sure that they'll be inspired to move forward. So just, guys, we spent extra 45 minutes, very well spent. But just to quickly, I just wanted to share the policy brief that we're expecting to see tomorrow. I just want to confirm that everyone has gotten these templates, because as at tomorrow, this is the container or the format in which we expect to see your idea shaped in. If you haven't seen it, please do well to contact us or any member of the organizing team, and we'll be able to follow up with you. Also important to note that, let me see if I can move this. So note that, your policy brief will look something like this. Something that looks like this. And don't forget, the word count is 1,000 words. So we don't have any other sessions. So you have the time between now and 2 p.m. Tomorrow to submit your policy brief. The link will be shared in the group as usual. We're expecting you to submit it using that link. All the best with hacking. We're all on standby to respond to any questions. So feel free to get in touch with us if you have any questions. With that said, I think we can close for tonight if we have no other questions. Do you have a question, Bright?
No,
okay.
thank you.
Okay.